Every town in every county has its can't-quite kids, the ones who disappear before adulthood. Girls with mood disorders and don't-care parents, hyperactive boys who always face sideways, their feet and fingers drumming under the table. In affluent Westchester County, 10 miles from Carmel, there's a culture in place to catch those kids before they jump the cliff. Teachers and parents who pay attention, and clinicians who speak the gospel of pharmacology. But if you're a teenager in Putnam who's lost the plot, you find out awfully fast that you're on your own, and that what passes for intervention is the courthouse. That's especially so in Carmel, the county seat. But don't mistake it for the Carmel, California of Clint Eastwood. It's a scatter of dead trees and unkempt lawns, a town thrown anyhow against a hill that slides ineluctably toward a lake. They put the high school next to the Putnam County Sheriff's Department, letting those problem children know what's what. Almost every girl I knew there was molested by an adult, said a friend of Josette's who moved away. There was such a strong rape culture, and so much darkness for one little town. As we cruise Carmel in his big-wheeled Benz, DePippo points or nods to his old hang spots. The sit-go after school, they'd let us drink a soda and smoke weed behind the station, he says. Behind the graveyard by Carvel, and the steps of the church on Route 52. He describes the pack of unsupervised kids he ran with in the early 90s, teens whose parents were entirely checked out, or who shrugged and let them party in the basement. There'd be 15, 20 kids drinking 40s and smoking weed and cranking up the Wu-Tang on a Tuesday. DePippo, who's called Big Ant, he's 6'6" and 260, has put on a few pounds since the joint. His penthouse is plastered with replicas of WWE belts, and he can't even drive the show-off car he bought. His fear of cops and prison PTSD have kept him from renewing his license. But what are you supposed to do when you spend half your life in prison? Then someone hands you $15 million. New York State paid him $2.9 million for wrongful imprisonment. Putnam County paid the other $12 million. DePippo was a teen when they locked him up, and in some ways his development stopped there. But don't be fooled by his $12,000 flat screen. He's as sharp as the lawyers who got him out of jail. And still, it took 3 trials to free himself. But those trials, and his lawsuit against Putnam County, yielded thousands of pages of transcripts and countless hours of testimony from the cops and his false accusers. His ordeal is the most richly documented case I've encountered in 30 years. I spent 5 months poring through those trial-tested records and talking to most of the principals in this piece. Much of what you'll read, though, derives from court papers, including every quote from a cop. They didn't respond to requests I sent through their lawyer to speak with me. Robert Tendy, the DA who'll be re-prosecuting Krivak, declined to be interviewed. His response by email, "I have personally thoroughly reviewed this matter, and I am confident that our prosecution is ethical and warranted." DePippo was a freshman when he started getting high. A couple of years later, the weed was switched out for wet, an especially noxious strain of PCP. On weekends, there'd be 100 kids wasted at a kegger up the hill at Barker's Field. Most everyone he knew, the girls as well as the boys, was tossed out of school by 17. Josette Wright was tracing that path as well, till someone raped and killed her at 12. The youngest of 3 girls in a chaotic house that was the hang spot for her sister's friends, she lived with one foot out the door, always looking for someone to take her in. She hated her whole family. Everything that happened in the family, she got the blame for. Rachel, the alleged 10-year-old Gombert victim, told police. Josette would camp out at the apartment Rachel shared with her mom and younger brother. It was the one place Josette felt seen and safe, so much so that she begged them to take her when they moved away. My mom loved her, and she was like my little sister. But I was pregnant and 16, she says. I said, "I can't take you with me. You're too young." Gombert was born a trope of dime store pulp, the drifter who wandered in and left a gouge. But because he hadn't spoken to the press in decades, till our cursory conversation in August, such facts as I have of him, beside his current address, the Cheshire Correctional Institution in Connecticut, were assembled from victim statements and trial transcripts. Gombert was raised by an itinerant single mom who moved states 5 times in 12 years. At 13 or 15, accounts vary, he was sent to live with his father, who shared a house in Connecticut with his aging mother. Young Gombert pitched a tent in the woods near his house and slept there on and off for years. Tina Z Gombert's earliest accuser to go on record, testified that he used that tent as his staging ground. It was where he took Tina, then 12 years old, while shaping up his alleged criminal M.O. "He just was giving me things I didn't have, maybe cigarettes and alcohol," Tina said in a 2016 deposition. From there, they began a sexual relationship that was forceful 9 times out of the 10. By forceful, she meant he bound and raped a child who hadn't yet turned 13. Gombert shoved her panties in her mouth before or during those attacks, she testified. Gombert was jailed during his 3-year run with Tina, but not for assaulting her. Thereby hangs the second horror of his story. According to Gombert's accusers, the cops and judges who handled his crimes treated them with contempt. The Tinas and Rachels and Laneys were apparently disposable to the men who took their calls. There are too many examples to cite in one piece, so take the attack on Tammy A. as illustration. Tammy was exactly Gombert's type, a short, pretty blonde going through a rough patch with her parents. Gombert, then 30, came to parties at Tammy's house after hiring her to babysit his daughter. Being 17, she let it slip that she'd sneak out late at night to meet her boyfriend. Just after 4 a.m. on July 31, 1994, Tammy crept out of her house, per her statement to police later that morning. She was several blocks from home when a man stole up behind her. He had a rope of some sort and a knife. He wore a black mask that exposed his stubbled chin. It was cleft and square, just like Gombert's. With his knife at her throat, her attacker forced Tammy to her belly, binding her and cramming her panties into her mouth. When he was finished, he pressed the knife to her temple. "Remember," he told her, "this is waiting for you." Hours later, Tammy drove to the Kent Police Department. There she met with Detective Kevin Duchkoff, whose name is as fitting as it is unfortunate. Tammy told him everything she'd just suffered. Duchkoff sent her out for a rape kit. All that remained was to sweat the local shitheads, including, of course, Gombert. Had Duchkoff stuck a swab in Gombert's mouth, it's possible that Josette and Robin Murphy would be alive now. But he swabbed no one. Or if he did, he never bothered to enter it in the case file. 19 years later, Tammy killed herself, telling her sister, just days before her death, she'd been ruined by the rape. Duchkoff, who didn't respond to multiple requests for comment, is now the Kent Town Justice. And that, in sum, is Putnam County, a place where young girls twist in the wind while the cops who ignore them get ahead. One other detail to bear in mind. 9 weeks after Tammy was raped, Josette got into a car with a man she seemed to know. That car, a red coupe with a black hood, was a dead match for the one that Gombert often drove. Shortly after, Josette disappeared. It would be 13 months before a hunter found her in the woods, her hands bound behind her, her panties in her throat, and her bones picked clean by coyotes.